for the sake of increasing the load, right? If you want to be, we expect the combined.
Hello, hello.
to be,
How is everybody? Good to see you. Hi, Henry.
Hello.
Good to see you, my friend. Lee and Greg and Edward. We'll see how many people we get here. I think this is kind of a tough time. People getting ready for a holiday week next week. But good to see you. I want to do kind of an unofficial start, just to kind of, because the whole purpose of this is like connection with people. So how can we model that just a little bit as we get started here a little bit? I'd love to, a few of you to and be willing to answer this question. What are people usually surprised to find out about you? Anyone, you can type that answer in the chat. Or I'd love a couple volunteers to just say hello and help us get to know you a little bit better so we can connect together. Henry says that I'm not a complete jerk. I would agree, as someone who's talked with Henry a number of times and known him for a few years now. I would 100% agree. But why would that be such a surprise, Henry? That's my question. Anyway, anyone want to just unmute and say hello and give us the answer to what are people usually surprised to find out about you? Who wants to say hello and be brave today?
I can say hello, but I can't think of an answer to your question.
Oh,
Pretty
come
darn
on, Lee.
predictable.
I'm sure there's something fun.
Well, I do. I'm trying to learn how to make craft beer, and I think that surprises some of my older friends because I used to not drink alcohol at all, and so far it's not been terribly successful. Most of the batches have kind of turned sour on me before I could get them completely done.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's a surprise. That's great. Go ahead, Henry.
So Jeff, the reason I answered the way I did, I tend to be very focused when I'm at work.
Yeah.
And so finding me in a social situation, I tend to open up, and that seems to amaze both the younger and the older crowd.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I've never like actively worked with you and like we've been colleagues, but we worked in other capacities here. And so like we just immediately opened up just because of the nature of our conversations. And so I've never seen that side of you really, although we've talked about it a little bit. So it's interesting. Okay, well, thank you all for being here. I'm excited to jump into this topic. This is something that's really passion fueled for me. And I find just a ton of value for myself personally as I utilize some of these principles, and I've seen in working with others here. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Let's get that going. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen. Okay, excellent. So yeah, we're going to be talking about connected teams here, and how that impacts collaboration, innovation, productivity, and a lot of other positive things. But we started with kind of a more fun thing. Throughout our session today, I'm going to use this tool. If anyone's been in a webinar with me, you've probably seen me use this. I call it Quick Chat. It's a way to engage in using the chat box in Zoom. And so do a quick test here. Essentially what I do is I ask you a question, but I don't want you to actually submit the answer until I do kind of a 3, 2, 1 countdown, and then we'll see what happens. So the question here is, where are you joining us from? It's always interesting to see, all over the country or sometimes internationally, we get people in these sessions. So just type in, where are you at? So we know, and then I'll do a countdown in 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, we got Atlanta, Alabama, Ghana. Wow, cool. Good to have you, Edward, from Ghana. Excellent. So yeah, an interesting mix. No one over here on the West Coast with me, so I feel lonely, but that's okay. So just to get to know me, a few years ago I founded my company called More Than Engineering. With the background in mechanical software, manufacturing, process improvement, engineering leadership, I wanted to combine these things, and also with this love of people. I recognized that when I was working with people, that's where I found the most joy in my work. And so I wanted to combine that. And so I've done coaching and training primarily for those in the engineering and technology worlds to marry these passions and interests and experiences that I had for the last few years. Earlier this year, my wife and I welcomed our 4th child into the world. And so that's a little picture of our family from a few months ago. I enjoy getting outside reading, and I read a lot of books. I did a count recently. I've read about 40 books so far this year. So really enjoy that, a mix of nonfiction and fiction. I picked up pickleball the last couple of years. Something surprising about me, to answer the same question that I shared earlier, is I despise cold cereal. It actually makes me gag. And so my children eat it all the time, but I hate it. And ever since I was a little kid, like I can't, like, even it's this weird mental trigger. It's it's nauseating to me. So that's a weird little quirk about me that I don't like, and I can't even hardly smell cold cereal drenched in milk. It's a weird thing about me. So that's something surprising. My promise by the end of today is I want to help you evaluate and grow connection in your teams to help increase these 3 things: collaboration, innovation, productivity. I'm going to give you some more resources and also some opportunities to work with me if you're interested to grow just beyond this session. And we'll be talking through some different tools and activities you can use. But my invitation to you is to be present, to engage with the session, put the cell phone away, unless that's what you're using to tune in, turn off all other distractions as much as possible. Actively participate, ask questions. I'll be monitoring the chat if you have questions, and just see what you discover. And then also, like, look for actions you can take, because what's the point of being here, giving yourself and me this time, if you're not going to do anything about it, right? So don't just take, hey, those are interesting ideas, but actually do something about this, right? So let's jump in. I'm going to start with a little bit of bad news. I don't love how news is always negative, but let's just talk about some realities. Some of this data comes from the most recent Gallup report. So most of the data is from 2022, but they just released this data just a couple weeks ago, actually. They do a worldwide engagement and work report. So one of their key measures that they look at is engagement. In the US, engagement, people who are engaged at work, is 31%. This is down a couple percentage points from last year. It was 33% before. Globally, it's 23%. So the US is a little bit higher, but still, that's not a great ratio. Less than 1/3 of people feel actively engaged at work. Not great here in the US. Stress is high. Okay, so over half of people in the US feel stressful a lot of the day. So you can see the question here, it's a little small, but did you experience the following feelings a lot of the day yesterday? And asking about stress. And more than half the people in this large survey said yes to experiencing stress a lot of the day, the previous day when they took the survey. That's pretty high. That's also up a couple percentage points as well. And here's another interesting thing. The Great Recession, or Great Resignation was kind of a thing during the pandemic, but still, there's a large amount of people who have an intent to leave their jobs. 47%, so almost half, watching or actively seeking a new career opportunity. So to me, that feels really high, where turnover is. I think this is a new question, because I don't see, it didn't show a change from year to year on this one. And here's some more data. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics here in the US. Productivity overall is down, but costs are higher across different sectors, which means that the overall effectiveness of compensation to output is down as well, about a couple of percentage points. and costs are up about 4%, which isn't surprising with all the inflation and everything. But yeah, so we have some headwinds, some challenges in the workplace as leaders, as companies, and as individuals, as we're trying to navigate our own careers, right? So some of the lessons that I take from some of this is that, yeah, just there's a whole lot of people that don't feel valued and supported in the workplace. And this is leading to lower collaboration, innovation, productivity than we would like to see. So I'm just curious to ask a question from you. Why do you think this is true? Why do you think that perhaps collaboration, innovation, and productivity are lower these days, or lower than you would like to see them in some cases? So share your thoughts here in the chat. We can have a brief discussion about this. But again, don't submit until I do a quick countdown. I'll do in just a moment, but I'll give you just probably about 10 more seconds to type an answer there. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts here. All right, go ahead and press enter in 3, 2, 1, go. High uncertainty, COVID isolation hangover, absolutely. Implementing a remote work policy, and so a lot of that continues. Growth economy cause lots of hiring with not much work to follow, leading to burnout. That's interesting. Yeah, so Greg, would you be willing to unmute and talk a little bit about how you think about this COVID isolation hangover? I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about this and what you're experiencing there. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, so I think my thoughts are, we went from all being in office spaces to remote work. There's people that I work with that their company has shut down all their physical offices, and now they're all working remote from home. Right. And so it's a little more difficult. Part of the reason that we still come into the office here is you still get engagement, you still talk with other people. And just to have that human interaction, just sometimes casual discussions that lead to, some ideas or something else that move in a positive direction. But I think a lot of people are still kind of stuck in that COVID mode where they're still kind of a little isolated just because of the way a business model has changed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Remote work has its positives and negatives. There's certainly its challenges with regards to connecting as humans. And so I'm not necessarily an advocate, we all need to be in the office or we all need to be remote one way or the other. Just recognize whatever the company policy is and what we're attempting to do here, we need to be aware of how do we operate within that, right? And remote work poses its own set of challenges to that. And it means we need to work extra hard to invite some of those things. So we're going to be talking about some of those things that might be helpful in doing that. Because whether you're in person or remote, there's still humans behind, every person on the org chart, every person on your team. We need to take care of and see those humans. Great. So a lot of great insights there. So here's just a couple other thoughts from me, some of my take. I think some of our work has become too transactional, right? So we're focused only on what do we need to accomplish? What's the task that needs to get done? What's the project? What's the deadline? All this stuff. But we're so focused on the transactions of our work that we're missing the human element behind it. And what's the person who's doing that work? And we're kind of treating each other as objects a little bit. There's a little bit of do as I say, not as I do in some cases with leaders and others. And in some cases, we might be losing touch with ourselves and our purpose and the things that we care about. So we might be losing touch with the humanity of other people, but also might be losing in touch of our own because we've kind of started to perhaps see ourselves a little bit negatively in some cases. So just a few other elements there that I think sometimes we don't think about. And these have been drawn out in a lot of conversations I've had over the last few years. But I think there's some good news here, right? Is that we don't just need to be passive and let these factors continue forward is we can do something about this. We can change. I can change, you can change, every one of us individually can change how we approach connecting and working with others rather than just waiting for people to connect with us. We can invite others to join us in this approach, and we can improve how and when we communicate in different ways. And so just to build on this idea of connection, I'm just curious to get a sense of where people are at right now in their feelings of connection with those they work with. So we're just going to do a scale of 1 to 5. And I'm going to say the number 3 is not an answer. So you have to be above or below the line. So 3 isn't valid. So 1, 2, 4, or 5. Okay. How would you rate your level of connection with those you work with? Okay, and I say don't say 3 because sometimes people just put it in the middle because it's almost like a non-answer, but really, like, where is it? You know, high or low, right? So put in that number, go 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, seeing 4s, 2s, and 1s. Someone cheated and said 3.5. Good for you, got clever. I didn't specify that one. Okay, great. So some people feeling high, some people not so much. I didn't see any 5s exactly. So there's some work to be done. And if you're a 4, like that's pretty good. Oh, there's another 3.5 creeping in. Thanks. So let's dive in. No matter where you're at, if you're feeling high or low, we're gonna build out some tools of connection in this kind of Venn diagram here, the 3 main areas that lead to more connection. And perhaps not surprisingly, if you've been following me for any bit of time or know some of the things that I work on, is improving our own awareness or our mindsets is critical to this process, because if we're not aware of ourselves and that also influences how aware we are of other people, connection is going to be really hard. So it kind of starts with our mindsets. We can define mindsets in a few different ways, right? Our set of attitudes that we hold, how we view or see people, our challenges that we experience, our surroundings and our environment, right? Sometimes we think about beliefs or assumptions or values or worldviews that orients the way that we approach situations. Like, how do we really sort through the different things that come us? You know, when we have a trigger, a situation, our mindsets frame how we react to that, right? But a lot of times, if there's something about us that we're trying to change in our situation individually or as a team, we're trying to move through a change process. And a lot of times that looks like this. So the model of a mindset driven results might look like this. Our mindsets are kind of foundational. Mindsets drive our actions and behaviors, which then drives our results up at the top, right? So this how this chart is shown currently is kind of our current set of results, our mindset driving our current actions and our current results. But a lot of times when we try and change something about us, we start prescribing. Oh, it's not working. Sorry, usually this moves and I apologize, it's not. So usually we start prescribing actions and behaviors that we need to change. So usually this would look like moving the actions and behaviors triangle at the top, say, hey, here's our new desired results that we want. I'm going to pull these actions and behaviors over, but we kind of neglect the mindset piece. And it leaves there, which if the mindset's neglected, it kind of pulls us right back to where we were, right? So that change, we might change those behaviors for a time, but it's generally not sustainable if we don't change how we think about the whole situation, right? A true sustainable mindset transformation would actually be shifting the mindset ahead of, or at least with, the actions and behaviors that we're doing in a sustainable way that leads to the more sustainable desired results, right? So think about just a couple analogies to think about mindset. One is to think about, like, it's the way we process things. It's almost like our internal operating system, right? we may have a bunch of skills or abilities we have. Those are like apps on an iPhone or something like that. But our mindset is our operating system. How are we operating? Are there any, and if there are any bugs or issues, which we all have, by the way, then that's going to cause some, maybe even garbage, you know, even if we're taking in the right information, it may spit out garbage because we have a little virus inside of us, right? Like we have issues. We're human. We're not perfect. We don't have a perfect operating system in our mindsets. So we're looking for ways to improve that. Another way to look at it is like this, you know, the way we see the world is, so I think about it as lenses. Do we see reality? Does our mindset sharpen our vision, right? Or do we have the wrong prescription? Do we have a blurred vision? Do we have scratches in our glasses or contacts that actually blur vision? And maybe, I mean, we're not seeing true reality, right? And so a couple of different ways to think about mindsets. Now, when we're trying to make changes personally or improve connections with others, a lot of times we might have, and this is true individually and collectively, a lot of times we have intentions to do good things, right? Like, hey, we want to have a great team. We want to establish a great company culture or whatnot. And so we say, yeah, let's do it. And so it's like in a car, putting your foot on the gas pedal, like, yeah, I want to do this. But there's usually some internal or even structural resistance that's holding us back from some way. This is why it's hard to make change sometimes. So oftentimes, and often we're not aware of it, but there is usually mindsets, beliefs, assumptions that are there. So it's almost like putting our foot on the gas pedal and our foot on the brake at the same time. Like we're trying to move. We say, hey, we want to have a culture of inclusion or sustainability, or we want to be able to improve how we work together, improve collaboration, or whatever we're trying to do. But there's something that we might not be aware of that's actually keeping our foot on the brake, and we don't actually make that progress. And we'll talk about that in a little bit and maybe give you some time to reflect on what might that be for you, right? Or your team. Working with our mindsets is also about, I love this word, in being intentional. You know, especially as an individual, you know, having meaningful goals, having purposes that are really meaningful to us, you know, kind of your why, to use Simon Sinek's idea there, if you're familiar with that, having core values. And again, a lot of these things can be true individually and collectively. You know, do I have meaningful goals for me, or do we collectively as a team have meaningful goals? Who are we trying to become? What's the kind of team that we want to create? Do we have values that we're trying to live by and work with as a team? What are the goals that the team is accomplishing together? Not just what are my tasks individually? How is that connected to the larger thing that the team's trying to accomplish? And also just this idea of like seeing other people. We absolutely need to see, sometimes we can see people in a negative light. We need to be able to see others as having and being full of potential energy. I love this idea of potential energy. You can think about gravitational energy. If you were to drop something, you know, it's if I had something in my hand, like a pen, it's full of potential energy here, and then it turns into kinetic energy as I let that go, right? Because gravity works on it. You think of potential energy also as like fuel in a car or something like that. That's potential energy. Then it turns into kinetic or movement energy. Every single person is full of this potential energy, fuel or gravitation, whatever it is. And it's our job together as teams, as we work together as leaders, to unlock that potential for individuals and collectively as a team. And when we can see and believe in that potential in others, then it helps them be able to see that too and be able to reach for that. So I want to do a quick activity. I'm going to give you a little bit of a moment of reflection. So if you have a notebook or a journal or something to write some things down on, I want you to reflect for just a moment. We're going to take about 60 seconds. Okay. And I want you to brainstorm 3, maybe 5 maximum things that you see as kind of a big goal, a big change that your team could make to improve performance, to be more innovative, to collaborate better. You know, think about innovation, collaboration, productivity. It's kind of these 3 things. what are some changes you can make? But then I want us to go and ask, okay, which one, you made a list, which one do you think would actually make the greatest impact if you can make that shift? And then that bonus, looking at, remember when we were talking about foot on the gas, foot on the brake, the thing that holds us in the brake is these hidden commitments, these beliefs, these mindsets, either individually or collectively, that might be holding us back. What are people saying that might actually be holding them back from wanting to work together better? What is it about how we're seeing people? What is that foot on the brake situation that's keeping us from making this change together? So I'm going to give you 60 seconds to brainstorm a few of these ideas. Consider, okay, which one actually make the biggest impact, and then think for a moment, if you can, what's actually holding us back? Maybe what's the root cause? What's the real belief or mindset challenge that's keeping us from making that progress? So take 60 seconds and do that. Okay. Hopefully that was nice to have a little bit of quiet time to consider some of these things for you. I was writing some things down for myself, some changes that I need to make, and as I reflected as well. So, and thanks, Edward, for sharing some of these things in the chat. So there's a whole lot more that we could get into in mindsets and awareness, but I wanted to give you this primer and at least do this a little activity to give you a little bit of momentum. But don't let it just stop here. Okay, now what are you going to do after this, right? So try and take that and see what conversations might be helpful for you to have with some team members to really start making some improvement progress and break down some of these barriers, right? Okay, so the next piece here, though, in connected leadership, we talked about awareness and mindset. We're going to talk about communication and flow of communication. I can't tell you how often when I was working in corporate, and now even when I'm doing a lot of coaching and training work, that people are telling me about a problem that's going on, say, okay, what happened? Well, there was some sort of miscommunication that happened, right? Happens all of the time. So I want to show you a model that might help us think about communication in a way that, okay, how do we keep the flow of communication appropriately? Because usually communication is things aren't communicated, we're either not getting it, or it's not at the right time, or something else. And so I'd like to think about communication, the flow of communication, kind of like a flowing river, right? So there's movement to this, right? And the two banks of communication that are kind of two critical elements are the listening or the intake of communication, and also the sharing of communication. And so inside between these two is where we are in the flow channel, right? If we're all one or we're all the other, we're getting out of the river and we're no longer in the flow, right? But we need to be in the flow of both of them together. So we don't want to be standing on the banks or creating a dam. We need to be getting in the flow channel. And I also like to think about the whole purpose of the communication is kind of what's providing that flow, the why, right? A fun way to think about that. So just reflect for a moment yourself. Which side do you feel like you need to work on the most? Most of us have a tendency toward one side or the other of that communication flow model. Most of us are either we will primarily listen and we don't want to share much, or some of us are like me, and we like to talk a lot and hear ourselves be heard, but we're not always great at listening. I've received some important feedback on that over the course of my years, and continue to work on that. So which of those two do you feel like you need to work on the most? Just reflect for a moment, type that in the chat. We'll do a 3, 2, 1, go. Sharing. Okay, interesting. Chaining beliefs in sharing. Okay, cool. Interesting that for this group anyway, most of you are saying, okay, I'm actually pretty decent at listening, or tend towards that more, but I don't confidently share. So no matter what, like this is important. We're going to talk about both of these. I want to talk about listening first. I do love the idea to kind of think about, hey, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. That's a pretty good ratio to think about. We should be listening about 2 times more than we're talking in most typical conversations. But so it's kind of identified. You can think about different levels of listening. Certainly we could ignore. We could pretend like we're listening. Selective listening. I only want to listen to what we hear. Attentive or active listening is something that gets a lot of credit. Like, hey, we're really, and this is good, by the way. We're listening. We might be repeating back what we're hearing from others to make sure we've really heard them. But I really love the idea of kind of this next level of empathetic listening, where we're not just listening for what is said, but we can really start to connect with the emotions and what's behind what is being said. Just to build this out a little bit more, I love this quote. This is from Stephen R. Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, passed away a few years ago, but talks about this concept of empathetic listening. So he says, empathetic listening is so powerful because it gives you accurate data to work with. Instead of projecting your own autobiography and assuming, which I think is so often done when we're listening. I know I do. Assuming thoughts, feelings, I misspelled that. It's supposed to be motives, not movies, and interpretation. You're dealing with the reality inside another person's head and heart. You're listening to understand. You're focused on receiving the deep communication of another human soul. Okay. So even those of you who said, hey, I need to work more on sharing, I'm decent at listening, might be interesting to think through. When's the last time you really listened to the extent that you really felt connected to a human soul, right? That's not going to happen in every conversation we have at work. Like, it's not expected, but sometimes we should be, right? Like really connecting as humans, and caring about them. So it's just kind of an invitation there to think, okay, even if my listening's good, maybe there's another level I could take this in some of those interactions. Really listen to understand and seek to understand the reality inside their head and heart. On the sharing side, when we share, I believe that this is it's more effective to do this, like Henry said in the chat. Sometimes he struggles with sharing because he doesn't value his input, and this can come from some of those mindsets or beliefs about ourselves sometimes as well. But when we're sharing with conviction, not necessarily saying like I'm right and everyone needs to listen to me, but sharing in a belief that we have something worthy to share. And in a team setting, when we share confidently and with conviction, it can help reduce fear and increase confidence in the teams. We need to be decisive and make decisions, but also it's critical to keep that flow, like share frequently, keep people connected, especially in a leadership context, keep people connected, kind of the why and what needs to happen, but then we can let them kind of take care of the how and give people autonomy to do that, right? So, but there's some research that I've found that shows that we can share the same things, but if we share it with conviction or if we share it kind of with lack of confidence, it has a large impact on the team and the people that we're sharing that with. So we need to believe and see the value that we have in sharing appropriately, and then go about doing that. That's it. And in doing so, we're serving our teams better when we do that. Okay, it's not because we're amazing and everyone needs to listen to us. It's just that we are trying to do this in service to others. When we see it that way, it might be a little bit easier to share that confidently. Okay, so we talked about awareness and mindset. We've talked about communication flow. This final tool we're going to kind of put together in this diagram is building psychological safety in a team. This is so important. There's so much power in psychological safety. A number of years ago, Google Google's a large data-driven organization. So they did a huge research project internally that they called Project Aristotle to define and track effective teams. How did they measure which teams were most effective and some of the outputs that these teams were having? They tried to measure it on different layers and did a bunch of surveys of the teams themselves and how leaders perceive them and different things. But of all the different factors that they identified were important to creating effective teams, psychological safety was by far the most important dynamic. Okay. And it's also interesting to think about how they defined a team. It's different than like a work group who, yeah, like we kind of put together this group, we're kind of collaborating a little bit, but they defined a team as a group of people who were highly interdependent with each other. So they're actively planning work, they're solving problems, they're making decisions, they're in service to a specific project, and the members of a team need each other to get their work done. And so they have to be working together. It's not just like, hey, cool, like we're just going to talk every once in a while, make sure we're aligned a little bit. That's a work group perhaps, but they define team as a group of people that needed to be interdependent to do their work. And so it came out very clearly that the teams with higher psychological safety, people in the teams were less likely to leave, right? They wanted to stick around. They were more likely to accept diverse ideas. So they're open to new ideas that were different than theirs. And so that's great. They brought in more revenue or were more innovative, and leaders saw them as more effective, both the individuals and the teams themselves. And so what does psychological safety look like? Let's just define this a little bit. We might think about this as, when team members feel safe to take risks and speak freely. Okay. Now, what this doesn't mean is that, looking at this second one, it doesn't mean that we're never going to have disagreements. In fact, a solid team that has high psychological safety will actually have a lot of healthy but non-destructive conflict. Okay. We're actually going to feel safer to bring up problems when we see them instead of trying to avoid those confrontations, because we feel safe to do so, even if we're confronting leaders, right? Because the last thing you would really want to do, if your goal is productivity and innovation, is for someone to see a problem and hang on to that and not do anything about it, right? So psychological safety actually encourages these sorts of conversations because we believe that others are going to support us in our work. So we're going to try new things that may or may not work, but we feel like people are going to support. And people are transparent individually and collectively with their strengths and weaknesses. So I say, hey, I'm not great at this. I'm going to need some help here. Instead of trying to be this, for me, I might have a tendency to be kind of a white knight and pretend like I have it all together. And there's no problems here, right? But actually improving the transparency, asking for help, asking for support, and feeling like I know people are going to help me when I ask for it. That's a powerful and connective thing. One of the researchers who's done a whole lot of work on psychological safety, she's written books, and you can also go look at her TED Talk. Her name's Amy Edmondson. She kind of identified these 7 questions, and I'm not going to read through every single one here, but they're a good measure for you to think, okay, how psychologically safe is my team right now? You know, people on this team sometimes accept others for being different. It's safe to take a risk. Working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized, right? Like, who wouldn't want to feel that? But if that is not felt, then that can be a challenge, right? So look at these for just a moment, and then I want you to consider and reflect personally with another one of these quick chats. Another scale of 1 to 5. I'm going to say it has to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. No 0.5s this time, or any other decimal points. You know, whole numbers that are positive, that are 1, 2, 4, or 5. I don't know how to get more specific than that, but someone's probably going to get creative here. How psychologically safe would you rate your current team or your most recent team that you've worked with? You know, sometimes I have people who are currently unemployed on these webinars, but just think about that. And let's give us a little rating here. So give you just 5 more seconds, put in that number. 3, 2, 1, and go. Okay. 4s and 5s and a 2. Okay, interesting. Obviously, you can go one level deeper personally and consider, okay, whatever I rated, why is that? And is there something that I can do, at least something I can control to improve that psychological safety on the team? Whether that's having a conversation or at least just doing what I can to support others when they take risk or they bring something up, or validating transparency in some way. Okay. So, you know, here's just a few examples of things you can do. If you want to do your part to improve psychological safety, admit your own fallibility, right? So lead with vulnerability on yourself. None of us have it all together. None of us have all the answers. Admitting that gives others that license and safety to feel like they can do the same. And then validating and supporting others, make clear why their voice matters. Why do you want to hear from them? Thanking them, being grateful for their contributions. And then I love this last one, replace blame, you know, pointing fingers at why something went wrong with curiosity. Let's focus on what's right, not who's right, to put that another way. But blame never does us any good. Yeah, let's focus on, you know, what the problem was, not who the problem was. But getting curious together on how do we solve these problems collectively. Another tool, I just put out a video on my blog and LinkedIn. Maybe some of you saw this yesterday. This idea I'd call the elevator of communication, right? So it's like these higher floors, these things in the blue, you know, these red floors are kind of in the basement, right? Curiosity in how we're interacting with people is kind of this ground floor, right? So if you're feeling some of these negative feelings, indifference or judgment or resentment towards others, can you at least get to that ground floor of curiosity as kind of this gateway to those more positive feelings in an interaction? And it improves that psychological safety. It improves communication. And it's going to improve how you feel about that person if you can at least get curious instead of judgmental, or blaming, or resenting other people. Okay. We kind of built out this, you know, these different tools: awareness, you know, the mindsets, the flow of communication, psychological safety. When you put all these together down there in the middle, that intersection, this creates the sense of connection and trust. Right? Which, you know, you don't have to think too hard to think, oh yeah, it's good to be in a more connected, trusting team. And it's something that we all want to do. We want to feel bound and connected and interdependent to each other. I think that the words connection, trust can be, you know, looped together a little bit. To use the word trust specifically, there's a book written a few years ago by Stephen M. R. Covey. This is the son of Stephen R. Covey of the 7 Habits, you know, called The Speed of Trust. And so speed, innovation, productivity, these things, when trust is higher, speed is higher, costs are lower. When trust is lower, speed is lower, costs are higher. So even like a bottom line issue, Like we want to be building this connection. We want to be building this this trust. Certainly we would argue that trust and connection bring collaboration and innovation. Like how could people really be collaborating if they're not trusting each other? And when they're collaborating, innovation is going to go up. We're going to feel connected and feel this sense of urgency to do great work for each other. So we're going to be more focused. We're going to be engaged. Productivity is going to go up, right? Creativity, my mind's going to be more open and free. Instead of focus on the stress and fearing judgment from others, I'm going to feel more open to these things. And then resilience and learning and a lot of other positive things that we're trying to improve here. So some summary actions for you. I expressed earlier that I'd love for you to take away some actions. Here's just a few ideas for you on each of these three areas. On awareness, we did that little activity earlier. Can you go a little bit further, work with your team to identify that biggest change and what might be the kind of underlying hidden commitment that's keeping you from some of the improvements you're trying to make together. On the communication side, decide, do you need to work on more improving listening or improving sharing with conviction? And find an opportunity in the next day by tomorrow to practice that, okay? Find something that maybe you're holding back from sharing and that you ought to be, or someone that you might need to listen to a little bit better. Practice that in the next day or so. On psychological safety, find an opportunity to lead with vulnerability. How can you take a risk, help someone else to do the same, or get more curious to go up on that level of elevator of connection? Let's push the up button there, right? So, and here's kind of the symbols to help us remember. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. I'm curious if you felt like I kept my promise. I gave you a promise earlier that I was going to give you some tools that could be helpful to build more connection and improve innovation, productivity, and collaboration in your teams. And I really hope I did that. Question is, are you all good from here? Well, yes and no. I gave you as much as I could during our time together. But I like to think about, probably know who Warren Buffett is, one of the most successful investors of all time. He could explain investing in one sentence: buy low and sell high, and only invest in things you understand. And I get that, but I'm not a billionaire investor yet. But it is the details that make all the difference. And so if you really want to succeed, then you need to be committed to finding the answers, and even when things are hard, like whatever it takes, because there may still be some things you need to figure out or need some help with. Like, how do I identify that biggest change and break through those hidden commitments? How do I listen better, improve that sharing conviction, create more psychological safety? How do we, instead of just me, how do I make this a thing that our team actually does together, or implement this with others? And there's probably other things you don't know that you don't know, right? This is just a few, right? So you can try and work on some of these things for yourself, or I would love to help. What I've found is that if people try and go their own way, and try and work on this alone in kind of an isolation, little, if any, progress gets made, partly because the whole point of this is to do this with other people. This is a connective team thing. So if you're trying to do this alone, it's kind of against what you're trying to accomplish. So those who really make progress, invest in themselves and their teams, they get the accountability and support they need to take some courageous action. So if you really want to improve personally or as an organization, I've created some service offerings for individuals and teams and organizations who want to get serious about connected leadership and connected teams. That can take a lot of different forms, and coaching, training, group facilitation, and speaking. But obviously this needs to be a mutual fit, and I need to fit you, and you need to be right for me as well. but I'd love to have this combination. If you feel like we can perhaps do some work together, because it's kind of physics. An object at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force, right? So if you're feeling at rest in some way, feeling stuck, can't motivate others, lacking of alignment in some of these things, communication struggles, and some of these other challenges, you can stay at rest, or we can perhaps work together, have a conversation, and get that outside force to accelerate your leadership or team progress. So here's what to do next. If anyone's interested in having a conversation here, you can go to jeff-perry.com/connection-call. And I'll put this link in the chat as well in just a moment. We'll just organize a time to talk together. You'll see my calendar availability. It is limited right now, and that's partially because I'm working tomorrow, but come next week, I'm going to be on vacation most of that, pretty much all of next week and for a couple of days. So if we can talk tomorrow, that would be amazing. Or at least just get some time on my calendar when I get back. Or send me a note if you can't find a good time, but we'll discuss your unique challenges and goals and what you're trying to talk about. And for a good fit, we'll design a package and opportunities fit specifically for your needs. So here's that link again. I'm just going to share these things. I love these success principles. Do what works, not what doesn't. Get training and support, even if it's not from me, right? But take some action and get the help you need, and persevere and keep moving as much as you can. So there we go. We'll do some Q&A. I'm curious to have some conversations here. And that QR code has the link there if people want to schedule a call. But what questions do people have, if any? I'd love to take the next few minutes to answer any questions. What stood out to you? Any ways I can help you think through some of the things that we talked about here today?
Jeff?
Yeah.
So I don't really have any questions. And I want to thank you for this time and this webinar. It was very effective and very thorough to the
Good.
point. So I appreciate it. I just want to commend you for the time you've taken and commend your services to anyone who would be thinking about it. I'm not a shill. I'm just a former client and a great proponent of your services.
Thank you, Henry. You're a kind man, and thank you for those words. And I'm curious, for you personally, if you felt like you got some value out of this, what was a point that you're going to take out of this and maybe take some action on after today?
So the mindset, actions, and behaviors model that you put up, I took time to restate it. And it's basically said mindset is concrete, actions and behaviors are pliable plastic. You can bend the actions and behaviors, but eventually, if you don't move the mindset, they're going to snap back to home. So to make effective change, you have to move the mindset. And I restated that just because that's a concrete way for me to perceive it.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Yeah, you might say it's concrete, but it is movable concrete. Like
Right.
You can move the mindset.
But it
does create that foundation. Yeah, that's great.
And it takes an extreme amount of effort to move a mindset.
It does.
So it's not like moving a stack of plastic. It takes machinery sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good point. Lee, what about you? I'm curious what stood out to you? What actions and changes are you going to make after today?
Well, I'm working on that. As I was listening to your presentation, I thought of two different groups. We're an architecture, engineering, design firm. So I have two teams. I have my department that I'm responsible for, and I also have projects that I work on with other disciplines. And so I can see applying this a lot better within my own team of electrical engineers, but it's a lot harder for me to get a handle on how to work with the other disciplines because they answer to different bosses, and that's going to be the thing that I will have more trouble implementing. But I really appreciated a lot of the points that you made, and I do plan to at least try to keep improving on what I've been doing. I've tried to be vulnerable and point out to them the things that I don't know, so that hopefully that will help do what you said, is to increase their feeling of safety. So
Good. Good.
that felt really reassuring to know that I was doing the right thing there. But there were a lot of other good points that you made that I want to try to start working into my meetings with the guys.
Yeah, that's great. And would love to have a conversation if you want some outside feedback on kind of personalizing that to your specific situation. So let's set up a call if you're willing to talk through some of that, for sure. Edward, if you're there, I'm curious to hear from you. What stood out to you as far as actions or insights from you today?
I need to work more on mindsets. There's a kind of belief system which need to be broken down. Because I work in a government agency where people don't seem to be, there's like an established belief which need to be broken down. And I think that's my major point I need to do.
Right. Okay, great. And so there's a lot of opportunity if you can change some of those mindsets and break down some of those hidden things that sometimes are holding us back, then that can unlock so much more progress for us. And I like to say our mindsets invite mindsets in other people. So if we have a negative mindset and we interact with people, we're inviting that same negativity in others. So if we want others to have more positive mindsets, if we change ourselves first, then we can invite that increased positivity in others as well that we're working with.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, very good. So any other questions or comments before we end off here today from anyone?
It was a good presentation. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good. I just want to thank you all again for being here. And I'll be sending out a link to recording and some other resources. I recently created a tool called the Connection Code. That's kind of an assessment of where you and the team are at and different things that might be helpful for you. We'll be sending that out in a follow-up email here as well. And I'd love for you to check that out. I just created it like last week, so it's relatively new. Just a quick 20-question survey, but looking at different kind of angles of where some of the progress needs to be made. So love to hear what you think of that as you check that out as well. But please, let's stay connected and hope we can help you or your teams in some way in the future. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your week and a happy 4th of July next week for those who are celebrating. Take care.